Good morning.
How you doing?
Good. Is it just the two of us?
Well, so far, I think Mohammed. I saw. I got an email that Mohammed had joined like an hour ago because he's tuning in
Confused on the
for us.
time.
He
Yeah.
probably didn't have the time, the daylight savings change. So hopefully he'll be back. I was just looking at Peer Draft, which you suggested. Have you used it?
No, but oh, what's his name? You might know him. Um, I can look it up. Anyways, he did a workshop in the last LYT
Gotcha.
cohort, and it looks really good. We're thinking about using it for the LYT book club.
Mhm.
So yeah, you wouldn't need the Dropbox.
Mhm.
Right. The Peer Draft acts as the Dropbox. The online site works as the Dropbox. And then, yeah, we actually would download the book club, Obsidian Book Club, into one of our own graphs, right?
Mm, okay.
So it's actually in there. It's a graph within a graph.
So then it would update through what you did in your own vault into the shared vault.
Right.
Interesting.
So yeah, if you change it inside the Obsidian graph, then it does get changed for everybody else. If you just link to it from your graph into the Obsidian book graph, it won't. You actually have to.
Okay, so it basically functions like a folder in your vault.
Yes. Yes, exactly. That's
Okay.
exactly it.
Okay. Yeah, that might be interesting. I don't I would have to think through my feelings about the proprietary nature of my
Sure.
stuff in here. Although I hadn't really thought about it. I'm just having this reaction in real time. I hadn't thought it through before.
I wish I could link you to the workshop. I mean, you don't have access to the LYT workshops, do you?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, they don't make it so that I can actually link it to you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I've thought about doing that. I've talked to Nick. Actually, I did a podcast thing with him once, where we talked about I think we talked about the book club, if I remember. And yeah, I've always kind of liked him. I always thought he was very kind of sincere about helping people
Oh, yeah, definitely
move forward
sincere.
in a way that, Scott really wasn't, of course. Hey, Eric. I had some online, I had some Zoom meetings with Scott too back in the day, and we chatted for a while. But yeah, and there's Pat. Hello. Okay, so it's about 10 o'clock. We'll see if anyone else kind of arrives. I think Tim isn't coming today, and Mark is still traveling. He said something about being closer to Ukraine. Somebody told him that he was
I
close
saw
to
that.
Ukraine. So so that was interesting. I wonder what that meant. A Danish person told him, "You're closer to Ukraine." I guess that means in case somebody rips out the nukes. Or
I just saw mentioned somewhere on one of the news sites that Elon and Trump and the Ukraine president are going to sit down for a discussion or something.
Well, they had that he was Elon was patched into a call that Trump was having with Zelensky yesterday
Okay.
in the room.
really,
Yeah, which is not a surprise. I mean, Elon's huge military infrastructure. He's provided Starlink to Ukraine.
that's true. I
It's
suppose they already
weird.
knew each other.
It's weird, but not
Not insane. Yeah.
It's
Okay.
not uncharacteristic for Trump.
not uncharacteristic. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
All right. I'll accept
So,
that.
where's Tim moving? I was unclear on that.
I don't know. He may have just been,
Just
changing
within
or
country, or is
something,
he?
or
He's not relocating, is he?
I don't know if he's like done in the Emirates, or I have no idea. Suppose I don't know that he's keeping it secret. I think we just haven't.
Yeah,
It just hasn't come out.
right.
Yeah. I always wondered if he was, when he was, if he was going to stay over there forever, or if he's still working, or if he's
Right.
going back to the British Isles, or what he might want to do. Yeah.
The man Mr.
So yeah. So we had an election.
Oh,
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did.
those
And
of
we
us in
had
the States, at least.
Yeah.
True. I would argue that, my friends who I've been chatting with around the world also feel they had an election.
You know,
So-
Well, I would think so. I mean, in the same way that we felt we had something when Brexit happened.
Yeah, although I feel they feel it more viscerally.
Hmm.
Certainly my cousins in Israel do.
Oh, sure.
So, yeah.
Sure, absolutely. It could change U.S. policy
yep.
quite immediately in January.
And I will point out cousins on the left. So
Sure.
already depressed cousins are now more so.
Yes, yes. So Florian and Chris have arrived. Hello.
Hello.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Well, I was
Hello.
nervous back in 2016, and now I'm just nervous all over again. And almost feels like it might even be worse, but that could just be my mind, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Sometimes you go
I don't know what to think. I was afraid of both potential outcomes. So I guess.
Well, yeah, I get that. I mean,
But I think that at least this time, I think the first time was just mayhem, partially because Trump was never expecting to win.
Right.
And so that caused, a whole lot of weirdness in the cabinet and who he chose for advisors and who he took kind of direction from, just because it wasn't something that he had expected was ever going to happen. Now, I think it will be interesting to see whether he actually, keeps these people that he's surrounded himself with, at least on the tech side, Elon and David Sachs and Chamath and those folks,
side of capitalism.
might have some
It's a
things
lot
to contribute. Who knows?
Oh,
I've
that's
heard a
true.
lot of big egos that will.
Oh, there's certainly a lot of big egos, but I think
I guess there always are.
I mean, I think Mike Pompeo had a big enough ego too. It will, the last I was trying not to pay that much attention, but the last few days just before the election, the beginning of that week, I started hearing some whisperings or some spitballing about, well, maybe the old neocons will have a role. Maybe there's a place in a new administration for Pompeo, and it's sort of like, anything but that as far as I'm concerned.
My feel is that he tried that with the first administration because he didn't know what to do, so he pulled a bunch of old guard in.
Yeah,
That's not gonna. He won't make that path again.
I would imagine so. And the whole idea of the Cheneys lining up against him seemed to be a reaction to the idea that he wouldn't do that again.
Right.
So anyway, Pat, how are you feeling? You had a lot to say in response to my blog post. Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Pat.
Oh, I'm muted. I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Not much to say right now, but as I just said, I look forward to more of a dialogue in your Substack on the subject. I have some thoughts that I'm distilling into some publications on my own Substack about the scheme, as I'm going to call it.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed that you had done something on 2025, and I appreciate that link. I had, actually, I also appreciated the one that Tim had linked to, because somehow I missed that one you did on that book review in August of that really weird looking book. Yeah, I think that typically my thing in the past has been sort of responding to and debunking. I mean, going all the way back to when I was a grad student, and Glenn Beck was writing books about, trying to, cherry pick events and topics from early American history that would show this, trajectory towards his worldview. And so I, sort of felt like, and that was a thing that I had talked with Heather about when she was my advisor, was, engaging with these people who are kind of hijacking history and using it for their own purposes.
Oh, Dan also here.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, you linked. Yeah,
The article.
Actually, I did that a week or two ago, and we had somebody who wasn't in the group who I thought had joined the group. Yeah, sometimes that happens on screen number 2. And so now it's a little bit weirder for me to be doing it kind of from, or to be, or to even imagine that I might be perceived as doing it from the other direction. I certainly don't want to be, kind of perceived as being in either camp. I guess maybe part of my problem, my beef has been more with kind of the left because I expected more from the left. And I mean, and I haven't gotten over 2016 when they pushed Bernie out, I guess. So
I was so angry in 2016, I didn't even vote. And
yeah, I voted for Jill.
Conscientiously into this one.
Yeah, I think Pat, maybe Pat just left in disgust. I don't know. He'll probably be back in a moment. But in any case, that was. I do, all my friends, of course, are pretty much appalled, and some of them are traumatized, and and my family lives in California, so and my sister went to college out there at Davis, and then has lived there ever since. My parents, my dad taught at Davis, and they've lived there ever since. So I'll be going out to see them at Thanksgiving time, and I imagine that I will hear some things from them about they always say your buddy Elon. It's like, dude, he's not my buddy. I owned a Tesla for a while, and I which I don't anymore. And I did follow SpaceX, and I think that some of the technology is just incredible. Yeah. Florian says, found out about the book this morning and ordered, but I'm behind. Yeah, Florian, you don't have to remain silent. We only read, the plan was only to read the first chapter, which really is just kind of scene setting. And I imagine we're going to talk a little bit about the current events first, and maybe even more so than the original chapter. Is it 48 pages in print? It's only 20 something in Kindle.
Or was it 28 pages in Kindle?
Yeah, like 20.
I'm reading it digitally, so
Yeah.
I'll see what I can skim in the interstices.
Okay. Well, don't feel like you're that far behind. And I think, it's a short book, so I thought, maybe we could do it in 3 more outings. I went into the thing, the book suggestions. Where was it? I don't know where I put somewhere. I put a thing about the timing, but now I've lost track of it. Suppose I could go to I turned the changelog back on, so maybe I could find it there.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say every once in a blue moon you got to turn that changelog on.
Yes, I did, and the
well, Eric had thrown me saying somebody said they thought it was dry.
I didn't. No.
It wasn't you, but it was somebody else who you had spoken to, and so I went in a little biased, but I also expected it to be a little more academic-y, because the guy runs a big research group on eviction, I think at University of Pennsylvania, if I remember.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually was fairly lively. It was not the most uplifting reading to do days after this election.
Yeah.
Where I think it's going to come out. His electoral college lead will kind of sit where it's at. But as electoral college votes go, right now it ranks 41 out of 47 for difference and split, which to me is just seems insane, but that is what it is. But the popular vote is going to narrow down too through the week as the rest of the votes are all finally counted. And he and others keep saying mandate.
Yes.
And the only thing that gives me hope is that there is literally zero mandate in these numbers at all. It's literally margin of error. We could have flipped a coin.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I think the biggest deciding thing, other than the quiet people who will refuse to vote for a woman, and particularly a black woman, because we still have those issues in this country to an incredible amount. And that's a tough number to count at present. But beyond that, it really is the economy,
Mhm.
which is mostly what this book is about,
Right.
and how we can't manage to vote and do things in our own interests
Yeah.
to some extent.
Well, or even interpret the economic information, I won't say correctly, but I will say in a way that we can all agree upon. One of the things, the thing that Pat responded to in my Substack with kind of extensively was my reaction to Heather Cox Richardson's November 6th. First, it was an audio, and then she published the transcript of it as well. Kind of reaction to the election, and some of the things that she said, and that she said in her follow up. She did an hour-long thing with Jon Stewart as well, were about, and I didn't have I had to get some more note cards, so I wrote my notes on an envelope. She said, Biden has been out there every day working on the economy. That Joe deconstructed. She used the word deconstructed neoliberalism. And that he wasn't about cronyism and corruption, and that and that now Trump is committed to returning to neoliberalism, and so that so that economic interpretation is difficult, I think. Hey Pat, welcome back. That we were just talking about the economics of the or the interpretations of economics that went into kind of the electoral, possibly into the electoral differences. This thing. I mean, the thing that I'm responding to in what people have said about this this fabulous economy there. Yeah, the market's up great. Unemployment is down. I think that there have been a lot of things said by people about how inflation, you're missing the point about inflation, or inflation isn't as bad as you think it is. And there's been, I think, a lot of argument about that, or there might have been, or there's just been sort of preference falsification, right? Where people have said, well, they tell me the economy is great, but it's shit for me, so I'm voting according to that. And then I think, Chris, to your point about a Black woman, yeah, I think that there's it's kind of funny because I talked to both. I had two sections, different sections of U.S. history, because I'm teaching 4 U.S. History 2 courses this semester. So one of them met on Wednesday morning, one of them met on Thursday morning, and I had 2 discussions, both really kind of good discussions. And in both of them, I asked, oh, wow, Pat's really having trouble with his computer. In both of them, I asked what, how do you think she lost? What do you think, accounts for the loss? Because we're living in this little, blue bubble in St. Paul as well. And the first group had a lot of, they had a lot of ideas, about the time, she only had 107 days, this and that. Nobody wanted to say she's a woman. In the second one on Thursday, a Muslim guy raised his hand, and and I'm happy he did, because and I'm happy it was a safe enough space where he felt okay to say it. He said, well, there are a lot of places in the world where a woman head of state would not be taken seriously. He said, Saudi Arabia would respond differently to a woman than at the head of an American delegation. That and I said, yeah, that's like I said, I was happy that he that he felt safe enough to say it. And I think that's going to be, I don't think that there's ever going to be a way to get to the bottom of that with, people. I don't think there's going to be a way to get people to answer that question honestly. So, yeah.
I'm intrigued by
There are indirect ways that sociologists have attempted to answer questions like this, and what they tend to find is that the non-college educated 2/3 of the United States isn't as racist and sexist as is presumed, by the college educated, the people who turn out to be more racist and sexist and classist than the people they denigrate. That's the finding. But I need a reference for that.
Yeah.
As far as inflation goes in economics, what has been reported is so-called anti-core inflation, and if you include food prices, which have gone up something like 70% in 2022 or since then, have gone up a lot. You find that this is what people are affected by. So I follow Adam Tooze on this. So I would tend to trust economists on questions like that. People like Adam Tooze. There are a few others.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the ideas of the Democratic Party have much. It doesn't matter they have the best ideas. It doesn't matter that they make phenomenal pronouncements or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't put food on the table.
Yeah.
It doesn't help me that I'm a male and I'm existentially evil, right? That doesn't, as the New York Times says. I mean, if you're a male in the New York Times, I'm being recorded, and I want this recorded. You're suspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's the Times. Years ago I didn't think that, but that's another thing. So all of this condescension to so-called flyover country, which is condescending,
mm-hmm.
it's helped the turnout.
Yeah.
If anything, it's helped, but really, I think the economy was a driver in this case. That's an opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think and I think the thing, it's kind of interesting that the other thing that Chris was saying about about the popular vote narrowing, as all of the returns come in, and maybe the electoral vote. It's interesting to me that we didn't have. I was fully expecting to have this, abolish the electoral college thing kind of being front and center, and this question of the representation of places without large populations, which I do think has kind of been lost in the argument about that. There's been a lot of talk about, the millions of unrepresented people in California or New York State. Looks like Pat's trying a different device. Welcome back.
I like his Citizen Kane cinematography there.
It is.
So I mean, I think that is still a, and and as Florian said, the condescension to the flyover country, which is kind of where I lived. Now apparently I don't, because I am in a little blue bubble in the Twin Cities, and and in that little blue splash in the middle of the country, which is kind of the only stronghold left apparently. There were, all of my friends were appalled and and are mad, and actually some of them aren't even mad yet. They're just sort of sad and scared, so yeah, I think it's going to take time to.
Well, the screwy part too, I feel like we seem to have this flip-flopping thing where a Republican administration comes in, gives everything away to the uber rich, and kind of screws up the economy.
Mm-hmm.
A Democrat comes in and fixes it. And the screwy part was, so Trump comes in, and by doing really nothing, he inherits a really great economy from Obama. And if you look at the line of what the economy does when he takes over, it continues on the same trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing he does do is he gives out a massive tax break to the ultra wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
and modest cuts to a few other people, but generally he's not helping out the masses at all. His populist space is doing nothing.
Yeah.
Or gaining nothing in that. And then the pandemic hits really at the tail end of his administration. He doesn't manage it well, and it requires a massive effort for Biden when he takes over.
Mhm.
So most of Biden's ability to do anything is hampered by, I have to deal with the tail end of the pandemic and how to fix that. So, and usually presidents get like 3 or 4 things that they can make any headway on at all generally.
Yeah.
And so that by itself is 2 of them out the door. So
Well, okay.
but then he comes in now, and so Trump is going to take over again, and people view the economy as bad. But all of the bad that we're facing is this massive wealth transfer that's gone to the uber rich, which means it's out of the pockets of the poor, who have made some reasonable gains in terms of, money into their pockets from a daily wage, which has gone up. But at the same time, corporations have literally gouged the entirety of that wage out of their pockets in raising prices with inflation, and literally the day before the election, the Fed votes and that number comes down again.
Mhm.
And the day after the election, every economist is like, no, rates are going to probably stay the same or go back up.
And Powell said, okay, give it to me.
Because Trump has taken over. So, and then the day after the election, the stock market, has massive gains because everybody, everybody realizes, no regulation, corporations can run rampant again and do whatever the hell they want.
I think I think that's an expectation that they have that I'm not sure is, and I certainly hope is not going to be realized in the sense that they expect it to be. I think, I think the trillions of dollars that were spent priming, in a sort of Keynesian pump priming maneuver, at the end of Trump and the beginning of Biden, unfortunately, I think like the money that was spent bailing out the 2008 Great Recession was a huge transfer of money upwards again. I mean, the beneficiaries of that were not primarily, although people got stimmy checks, I guess, so that was good. But really the majority of that money, did not end up in the hands of working people, and didn't, and so I think that and the idea that all, I mean, I hope you're not right, Chris, that the only thing that's going to happen is more deregulation. Some of this, there's been a lot of talk, in the Trump orbit of this whole, kind of make America healthy again thing, make regulation of the, the pharma industrial complex and the regulatory capture of federal agencies more transparent, and kind of chip away at that. I hope some of that happens, even if it's only even if it's only just something to focus people's attention on.
Well, that seems to be the last vestige of what the old Republican Party still has in their DNA, is deregulate it all. Get rid of, the government is bad. They can't do it well, so get rid of it. And it's even been happening still while, the dismantling started at Reagan and it continued through Trump, but it almost seems like it has been continuing apace even during, the Biden administration, that is broadly beholden still to, the House and the Congress.
Well, and also has sort of given away and delegated or just surrendered a lot of its power to these people who come out of industry, go into regulation, go back into industry, and this kind of revolving door thing, where there isn't really there isn't really enough transparency. So I think you're right. I think there's a danger that it could go to, well, let's just cut, let's just eliminate the Department of Education. That would be just weird, bizarre. But there is an actual argument, if it can be made, if the conversation can be had about the inefficiency of bureaucracy, about the layers and huge volume of regulations that haven't kept up with what it is they're supposed to be regulating and haven't sunsetted, because they generally never do. Ooh, that's a nice box. And I have to get myself a file cabinet. Actually, I think that's I'm gonna go looking out in the world for a used file cabinet. So
if you got a month or two and you're not in a rush, this one I got for $250, and that one I got for like the big metal one was $125. And in part, people don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
So if you're actually looking for them for index cards, and I think that I've got a 20 drawer. My 20 drawer library card cabinet was, I think I paid $250 for that.
Yeah.
And it is a stunning piece of furniture.
Yeah, I've got that card catalog that I got from the little elementary school back up in Bemidji. I just don't have space for it in here. So, but I do have file folders. 8.5 by 11 file folders. I need to find a place. They're in a pile on my desk here. It's getting to be a bit crazy.
A friend of mine who's now retired but has to retain records attorney has been cycling his stuff out of his file cabinets year by year. And so he's now got 3 file cabinets empty that he has no idea what to do with. So if anyone wants to drive to Chicago,
Nice.
He'll happily give them to you.
Wow.
Well, I did see like 2 months ago a regular like 8.5 by 11 filing cabinet came on the market that is the exact brother of my steel case, including like the fine detailing on the handles.
Oh, nice.
And it went from 200, I think it's down to 100 now. And I'm waiting. I'm gonna make an offer for 50 to take it off their hands.
Wow. The long game you're playing.
But it's literally the steel is so thick and dense and lush on it. Like just in scrap metal, it's probably worth $50 by itself.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to you, and we'll go on a tangent for a second because I've been reading about it lately. You talk about cycling files out. Filing cabinets originally were built so you could take the whole drawer out and put it somewhere else and put a new drawer into the office. So you literally could take it from the office straight to storage without moving it. And we use cheap corrugated, like the cheapest corrugated cardboard to put files in and go dump them into some storage facility somewhere. But
and my file cabinet has the same design where you can lift the whole drawer out securely and slot a new one in.
In fact, you can tell roughly when that stopped happening because I think this one's got it. The back of the drawer has this little weird handle. And when those handles disappear from filing cabinets is roughly when the cardboard box takes over and people pull the drawer in and out, but they don't remove it physically from the entirety of the thing. But it's pretty, and this one, the drawer I work out of on a daily basis either stays on my desk all the time or moves in and out depending on which drawer I happen to be working with. And I love the handle at the back. So
yeah, sure.
So when you find yours, Dan, look for the handle.
All right. Will do. So to get to the chapter, I think it's always useful every time a new book is, every time we read a new book or I find a new book or whatever, to see now we're up to 2022, and so we've got the accurate figures for the poverty line in 2022 at 13,590 for an individual and 27,750 for a group. So that was kind of a stamp. That was like the first thing that I kind of noted was, okay, this is I can put that in the batch of other ones that I've got from other books.
I'm kind of curious what people make of the the curious comma in the title of the book, and what does it mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or what does he mean by it? What does the title of the book mean? Because it's one of those things unless you think about it specifically, you see this title and you don't really notice it. You go right by it and you just jump right into the book.
I did notice it when I was putting it. I was actually putting it in the community note. I said, "Oh yeah, there's a comma there. That's
Yeah, and I also noticed it when trying to search the vault. I got two hits. I got like poverty, comma, by America, and then I got like poverty by America, and it was linked to index by I think two separate people.
Mhm.
So that's like an example of how like those kind of small details can go wrong if you don't think about like when you index something, you just miss the comma and then you index it again, and it's like it doesn't work. Definitely in like a collaborative vault. It doesn't really matter because I got the impression that you're not really using the kind of knowledge vault in it. I think because I checked the vault, and I think in the earlier editions it was much more the aggregated knowledge. Everyone had their own kind of node, and
Yeah.
that's
In the
the
very
impression I got.
beginning,
But
we were
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
experimenting with that. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's now it's become more of a just place to sort of track our progress, but not to initially we were, it was really it had kind of jumped off of the Rome research book club, where it was much more focused on different ways that different people made notes and linked things and all that sort of thing. And I think it's nice that that is still available back there, but yeah, I think we've all kind of decided on how we're
Yeah, do you
our
think
own,
it's too much work? Because I've tried like a collaborative vault with someone, also Obsidian. And for us, it also didn't work. I felt like it was too much work. The idea of our collaboration was like just general because I met him a lot actually, and we discussed a lot of stuff. So it'd be interesting to then. I'm going off topic, by the way. So
That's fine, that's
if you
great.
want to stay on topic, yeah, okay.
Okay.
So yeah, so we came together regularly, like I don't know, like a few times. I don't know, a few times a month or something. And then the things we discussed, we were like, okay, maybe it's interesting to start like a collaborative vault, put it all in there. But what I noticed, and we actually tried like a full-blown Zettelkasten and then atomic notes, but I thought that was too much work, too much overhead. I didn't really enjoy doing that. But I think from seeing your vault, I think a more free-form kind of a community forum where you're just conversing about stuff and then you're linking to certain things. I think that might be much better for like collaboration in that sense.
Mhm.
That's kind of because it also produces a lot of knowledge, of course. And it's not as much work as like trying to make individual notes and then titling them and then linking them. I mean, that's something you do in your own time, right? And in your own, and then to have to do that again, I don't know. That for me was too much.
The thing, kind of the duplication of work and where in in each of our personal processes it stands, right? That was that did seem kind of duplicative. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So I'm kind of interested in because I'd be curious, like if you maybe if you were to do like another edition, what you would change and do differently, like because it's kind of hard to get this right. I'm not sure. Can you even get this right? I think Bob recently actually published an article about a collaborative Zettelkasten.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's I don't know, like
And F put a link to Peer Draft, which we were chatting about just before we began this morning before everybody started arriving, and I think the issue is kind of that, and as I understand Peer Draft, I haven't really looked at it, but and correct me if I'm wrong in paraphrasing your explanation, F. That it lives kind of like a folder within your own actual personal vault, but it publishes changes out to the shared version of it. Personally, I'm not quite sure that in my own mind I've dealt enough with the questions of how much I want to share and what I want, what I feel sort of proprietary about versus what I want to put out there. I do think that generally folders are a good way of doing it, and I've been playing around with Obsidian Publish, just publishing out a folder, open a folder as a thing, attach publish to it, and send it out to the world. And then the things that link to things outside the folder within my main vault just become kind of links that don't work, but also serve as kind of indicators that yes, I have something else. I'm not sharing it with you. So the degrees of sharing, and also, and I think there's also a question of where you want to do your own work, where you want to formulate your ideas, and how much you want to massage them before you put them out there to the group or to the world at large.
Yeah, you are misunderstanding it a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, it resides as a folder. The peer draft, for example, Obsidian Book Club would be like a folder inside your graph, but your graph is still private.
Right.
It's only stuff that you put in the Obsidian folder that gets shared to the other people that are.
Okay.
So it's no different from what we have now. I mean, you've got the Dropbox. The only difference now is we're sharing to your Dropbox, and we don't know what you're going to do with that Dropbox, right? And they're really encrypted and everything, so nobody can really get in there and see it. But anyways, I'm not really advocating for it. I was just wondering if
sure.
Curiosity there would be. I don't think there's any type of security, any problems as far as our own personal ideas, and having to write them early or being, not worked out full enough, in the way it is. I mean, when you work it out in your graph, your personal graph, and you're ready to share it with the group, then you just move it to the folder that has the Obsidian Book Club graph in it, right?
Yeah. I think I guess there is always a question of, where does the data live, and how permanent is it going to be? I suppose if I disappeared from the world, there would be some question about the continuity of this Dropbox.
Well, it's shared, so we could take our copy and keep it locally or do something else with it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I imagine each of you can make a copy, and then it would be a local copy, and it would be forked, but if when and if the thing ends, then that'll be, not really that much of a problem. Yeah.
So I went off topic there a bit, so I think it's good to jump back on topic. And for me, this is like, sorry, that happens, I think, with this book club a lot sometimes. Probably, I'm not sure, but well, for me, it's like
It's good to talk about that administrative piece every now and then, because I feel like we started with a bigger head of steam on doing that and sharing it, and there was a lot more activity and really interesting activity that sometimes didn't happen in our discussion, or things like, the last 2 or 3 weeks, there were way more people than we generally have had, which is not only a good thing, but it also is tough for the new people who are coming into a group that has been around a while and has some loud, brash, cisgender white male energy that, we're not always as good as we could be. But it also meant there was some better than usual chat.
One of the first things I noticed.
in the side chat, there was some really good conversation. And I think if you go back and you watch some of I probably was not as good at it the last couple of weeks as I should have, but usually Dan in his teacher role, and I'll put on my teacher hat and I'll ask questions specifically geared to get the quiet people to say something
or redirect.
The couple of times I did it in the last few weeks, all of that commentary went straight to the chat and not to the audio. So if you're watching this regularly and you're not actually in the vault to get that piece, you should ping Dan to find it. But it's nice to think about how can we collaboratively do this in an easier way. The tough part for me was always the context of my own personal notes is hard to map it back over here, in part because they're unfinished, nothing's happened with them, and a lot of the context stays in my head in terms of notes that I do write. So I felt like I was doing twice as much work to drag those into the Obsidian vault and do anything here with them. And there's a programming concept called "don't repeat yourself" that is usually talked about as writing dry code, DRY, don't repeat yourself code.
Oh, cool.
So anytime I drag something in, then it's okay, now I'm working on it in this new context. And then I have to go back and repeat my own notes back into so this new, plugin sounds interesting because then it might allow me to not have to repeat myself and do the work in both places and drag it back and forth, which for me was just too much.
And that's actually exactly what I was thinking, Chris, when I put that in there, because I was doing the same thing. It's like, okay, I'm putting notes here, and then I've got to copy them back here, and that.
Yeah.
In fact, you'll notice I have a couple of templates that are somewhere hiding in the Obsidian Vault that show up in a way that allow me to more easily copy things back and forth, or that add little touches like when I make a comment, here's a date and a timestamp and a picture of my face, so that in a social media-esque way, it's a little clearer. It's me, and I'm saying this thing that follows below it.
Yeah.
I think that's the sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think it's the crux of what I experienced as well. It was just too much work, duplication, context stays in your head whenever you're making notes. You'd have to do that additional. So you have to duplicate it, but then also go to the additional step of like creating the context. From what I've seen from this vault, I think the best solution was just the community forum, because then you can pull in your own notes and then kind of write like a comment or a post and share that with people. It kind of creates something new. Like you'd go to a social, but then it's kind of a closed off way of doing it.
Yeah.
That's for me, that's the impression I got, like that was the best way, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
Well, I think it's also kind of a question of the goal, right? And from this, I mean, and that we talked about that a lot, in the last couple of weeks with the Bob book as well. I think that I always sort of imagined the goal of the vault to be sort of supporting the conversation, right? So that it should, maybe facilitate people kind of figuring out what they want to say when we meet to talk about, the chapters of the book that we're reading. And so I guess in my mind, I put less focus on that, on what stage of notes people were putting in the vault. Because, again, that would be an additional pile of work. And that was early on when we were, in the first couple of iterations, when we were doing Dawn of Everything and then Smart Notes, and then even the third one where we read the two books. There was a lot of time involved in kind of looking at people's stuff in the vault, and to whatever extent. I mean that's, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a big.
Well, also,
a big
early on when we started too, it was an interesting way to see how are other people doing this process. What does it look like for them?
Right.
But at some point, it's you get the Luhmann quote. It's like it's like a porn movie. You come in and you see everything, and you're still unimpressed. Like it's boring, and you're not seeing the actual. Even though you see the notes, you're not seeing how they're connecting unless you're watching them over a long term and evolving into something or turning into some piece of writing or some clearer argument. And it, that. To see that is a lot, like Dan said, is a lot of extra contextual work to go in and watch what slowly is linking to other things. How is it changing over time? And that, that's worse than watching paint dry.
But I do think that sort of forensically, it's good to have that. It's good to have this Dropbox shared vault, and it's good, and I think in the future it will be good to sort of be able to look back on kind of how it's evolved, how ideas have evolved, how maybe things that we have talked about a lot of kind of economic social justice stuff. So at some point, we may be able to, or somebody who's interested may be able to kind of go in there and say, well, okay, how have people's ideas about this evolved, or whatever. So I think that's, that it's kind of good to have. It's always, as a historian, I love sources. It's always good to have, archives, but I don't think that it really necessarily, that reading, Chris's notes about the reading, I'm looking at, actually, there's one, you aggregated some questions, right, about poverty by America. Chris, in the last couple of days, and I'm not sure whether I prefer to read them or to hear you. I think I prefer to hear you talk about them in the meetings when we're online together. So there's that.
Well, sometimes what happens is I'm writing bits of ideas down, and you'll see that in my annotations. And then I may take 2 or 3 things, and half the stuff I say here is me floating trial balloons of stringing 1 or 2 ideas together to come towards a thesis, in hopes that someone pushes back and says, no, that's not what he meant. You're wrong. Go a different direction, which almost never happens, sadly. I wish it did more, or like, hey, no, that comma means this, damn it. But you try, and then and it's part of that sense making. So it's, it's like, there's a scholar named Matthew Daniel Eddy who studies, students' notebooks from the 16th, 17th centuries to figure out how were they making sense of their world. How did they go from reading the things they were reading? What did they write down? How did they make sense of it? What did they think of their world? But to do that, you have to have the source document. And, some lucky scholar is going to come along and find Dan's treasure trove of all these videos, all of our annotations and notes along the way to figure out how did we make sense of, election 2024, let's say, or poverty in not only America, but the world, because we've now, we've read, White Trash. We've read a bunch of economic stuff that touches
Really
on
Understood, Myth America,
economics.
There's so many of them, yeah.
Donut economics, which I think is how this book ended up in that mix. Is here's another interesting take. We probably should have been smart, and this should have been the one time where we did 2 books on sense making or note taking or something back to back. We should have just bookended the election on both sides with something, happier, I guess.
I don't know. I think this one, I don't know. I guess it'll depend where it goes, but I think there was a lot that I highlighted out of this first, a lot of the and actually a lot of the numerical things, I think that he does a good job of kind of putting in. Oftentimes I'm not happiest with the idea of, okay, we're going to hear this, this story of this, of this girl, who was born prematurely, Crystal or whatever. But I think it does kind of humanize, the statistics a little bit, and even just things that are not as, statistical, right? In America's meatpacking plants, 2 amputations occur each week. Fingers, hands, that type of thing. The qualitative kind of sort of lived experience, because I think we read, we know that in history there is, the jungle, right? That's kind of a stake in the ground, but that led to something, and then things, theoretically changed, and probably did change in terms of food safety and USDA regulation of food safety, but not necessarily of the work experiences of packers, right? Yeah. And or the marginalization socially of packers, or the ethnic minority status, although it's a different ethnicity now in southern Minnesota. It's mostly Latin American rather than Bohemian or whatever it was in the Chicago stockyards. But that these things have some type of continuity that continues to exist. I thought another good thing that he did was, talk about kind of the developing world, right? Where this most abject of poverty that we normally think about, we think about it as being somewhere else, right? And that this exists, right here. We just don't see it. And so I thought that was super valuable.
Or even the subtle thing of, when they talk about policy, we're doing it for the working guy or for the middle class, and it's never said to be done for the poor, because we just don't talk about them.
We never say. Yeah, I mean, when was the last time you heard a politician say working class or poor? Yeah, that's that's true.
Well, I mean, in the last couple months of the election, there was a lot of talk about the
Well,
the working class, or people, and particularly Harris, and Trump was doing it as part of a populist thing, but never talking about. Although to me, I think, and he does it more subtly here, I think, than a historian would. In many history books, the author will inject themselves at the very beginning or at the end, or somewhere in the book there will be, here is kind of roughly who I am, where I grew up, and provide some context of their perspective in terms of their time and space while they're talking about whatever the history is. And he does that here, although I think it kind of flies by. So here is an East Coast elite academic who knows his stuff. I don't think there's anybody in America who knows more about poverty than this guy. But he specifically, in telling these stories, is saying, I grew up very close to this. I have seen it myself and seen it from both ends. He doesn't give you a good idea of what conditions he lives in now or where he's at socioeconomically, but assuredly he is in the top 5%, if not top 1% in terms of pay and the type of home he lives in. But he's still connected to, on the ground, spending time on a regular basis with these poor people who he uses and writes the word friend with respect to these people who are super marginalized. And I guarantee you, Donald Trump spends no time with anyone anywhere close to this spectrum.
Right.
But and I appreciate it because, having grown up in rural Appalachia, these people are, there are people I still stay in touch with and know and am friends with, that totally this is their lives. They live this way, and it's painful for me. I don't go back to high school reunions, type things very often, in part because it's depressing to see.
It's I think there's a lot of sort of life experience that he does a good job of kind of uncovering, and actually kind of specifically points to how some of this stuff is papered over. He does, at one point he says, hidden behind the system's vague abstractions, justice, law, and order, is the fact that the overwhelming majority of America's current and former prisoners are very poor. And doesn't, and the point is not so much, I think, to assess whether this is a cause or an effect.
I was shocked that, people in mental institutions and prisons aren't counted amongst the poor at all. I would never even have thought to think, are they or aren't they? I always would presume that they would have been. Which, when you think about it, it's like, okay, where are those new aggregated numbers that make our levels of poverty way worse?
The whole thing about official statistics, I mean, struck me when you were talking earlier about, where someone was talking about anti-core inflation, and the whole, because I was reminded of the whole argument that what's his name, Eric Weinstein, and his wife had with Harvard about inflation, about how you actually generate the CPI, and all of the assumptions and kind of propagandistic lies or obfuscations that are included in it. I think that whole thing is, maybe slightly less valuable to me. I mean, I like statistics, and I can generally use statistics to kind of understand, and try to put myself into the world that they represent. But I think he's doing a better job of kind of helping me do that, right? When he's talking about, life expectancy of poor Black men in America being the same as, as of men in Pakistan and Mongolia. And that is, I think that's helpful. I hope he continues, through this thing. I mean, actually, one of the things that really jumped out at me was this bandwidth tax, right? This being poor reduces a person's cognitive capacity more than going a full night without sleep, right? Being worried, being preoccupied by poverty,
Yeah.
gives you less mental bandwidth to deal with other things.
I didn't
What is the
write it in my notes for that, but there is also a Trump bandwidth tax
Sure, there is.
right now on essentially anybody who leans anyway away from Trump. Is you have shut down this week because of what's happened,
Mhm.
and it's a bandwidth tax on all of us, and an emotional tax that
Yeah.
you got to do the work and grieve for a minute so that next week you can turn into resistance mode, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I do feel like people. I mean, maybe it is a wake up call for people who, had maybe believed that that somebody else could fight the battle, or that you could go out and vote, and then sort of go back to your really, to your real life and your real concerns and everything. I think that I mean, and especially because the bundle of things that were represented by the Dems, and the bundle of things that are represented, and I won't even say by the Republicans, because I don't think Trump is the Republicans in the way that we had previously understood them. But by this constellation around Trump, I think is so undefined, right, and yet to be defined, that everybody has to kind of stay engaged, and even the people who supported him need to stay engaged. These all-in podcast guys that are very excited and that supported him and stuff. That I watch their podcast generally every week. They need to kind of keep track of this and see if see if what they thought they were getting in this bargain is what they're really getting, right? And so does everybody else. I think that and that would have been the case, I think, on the other side too, if Harris and Walz had won. What is it that is actually going to come out of this? Because there are some things that I think could potentially have been good in either case. There are some things that could potentially be super scary, and I don't think that this is any time to just buy the bundle.
Well, I've gone into cocoon mode.
Yeah.
Over this. I've just been, as far as international relations go, and just doubling down on my John Mearsheimer interviews on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't know. What, for context, where do you live, Florian?
New York, Manhattan.
Okay.
In between Central Park and Lincoln Center. So I'm coming to you live from Lincoln Center.
Perfect.
You're just using the lower quality broadcast equipment, right?
That's right. That's right. I'm not even showing my books this time. So.
Oh, I don't feel self-conscious that nobody else noticed that it was, other than it's yellow.
Yeah.
Nobody else really knows what that means.
Yeah. No. For posterity, I'll repeat Chris's comment, because there is some truth in it. He said that with those Springer Verlag books in the background, I look more like an editor for Springer Verlag than a mathematician.
Oh, okay. I was saying, what's the context of this conversation?
If you walk into a math professor's office, you'll notice at least a foot's worth of shelf space dedicated to books that are all yellow, or there may be yellow books interspersed between all the rest, and it's because one of the biggest math publishers on the planet has a very specific format that they've had probably since the 40s.
Oh, okay.
Certainly the 50s. Everything is this like yellow hardback, and a lot of mathematicians will put all the yellow books in one spot and then all the rest somewhere else because of the, OCD tendencies they may or may not have.
Oh.
Right.
Well, okay. Now I get it. I thought I had thought they were preprints or something that you were responding, that kind of thing.
Well, those are on disc, but no, they're also numbered. So there's more OCD for you.
Yeah, for getting numerical order. Sure. Okay. So then so we didn't have a lot
The
of,
book is quite good, as Dan was saying. Professor Dan, I'll use the honorific. Um, the, the book is quite good about illustrating the statistics, comparing statistics with other things that may be more familiar.
Mhm.
Before you mentioned the $700 billion giveaway during the 2008, that was Paulson, right? Give me a check for $700 billion.
Yeah.
And there's a statistic from environmental science, which is the annual cost, I think it was in 2001 or so, uh, of wastewater treatment all over the world is $750 billion, three-quarters of $1 trillion.
Hmm.
So that's one way of visualizing that big number. Not paying that, not bailing out the banks was equivalent to not treating wastewater on the planet 1 year.
Wow. That's interesting. Yeah, that is an interesting way of looking at it. And I do think that it's valuable for, for authors, especially people, like this guy who have, been with, folks that he calls friends who have, been sort of living these statistics, right? Yeah. What does it mean that, that gun violence in Chicago killed 722 people in 2020, but wounded 3,300? And then 8 out of 10, that idea that was new to me as well. 8 out of 10 gunshot victims survive and then have to live with the consequences, not only the pain, but just, I was involved, I was in the middle of this thing. And, how does that affect the rest of your life?
Well, it costs, I think a gunshot will cost you 100 grand if you survive.
Mm.
That's a rough figure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's
So
one of those things too. No one talks about those unseen taxes that are put on people, whether it's an emotional tax or a physical cost tax. Like, if you don't learn how to read, that there is an economic, physical tax on your life because you don't know how to read when you're growing up. And so when politicians talk about, oh, we're going to lower taxes, it's always said in the sense of how much money you're going to take from your paycheck and give back to the government.
Right.
And it's never meant how much easier we're going to make your life, in part because making other people's lives easier and lifting them up burdens and becomes a tax on the uber wealthy, because someone somewhere has to pay for the doing of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those kind of unspoken about taxes that really make it super easy, or the tax of, if you're African American and driving around town in a car, there is an additional tax placed on you because the police are more likely to pull you over. And even if it's just a 20 or 30-minute stop and nothing else happens other than a warning or whatever it is, that's a tax on you and your life. And I've got a friend in fairly wealthy Pasadena who I've only ever seen wearing a suit ever in the 20 plus years I've known him. I've known him now for 22 years. He never wears anything but a suit. I've never seen him in casual clothes of any sort. And he told me a year ago he has been pulled over or stopped while walking 13 times in the city of Pasadena.
Wow.
Yeah. And like literally a black guy in a suit 13 times in 1 year. Like,
wow.
And Pasadena, in fairly progressive Southern California, like, that's just was stunning to me to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there were some comments, and I think I don't know if it was talked about, but in the chat about how education, at least for Chris and I think someone else, kind of helped them to kind of lift themselves up. in the Netherlands. There's a new government. Geert Wilders. Yeah, he's similar to Trump, but he's a bit, I think, even more extreme. He's anti-Islam, very much so. I think Trump is less like that. But they won with a landslide. And one of the things that the thing is, Wilders himself is not the prime minister. There was someone else, because if Wilders was going to become prime minister, no one wanted that, I think. The ability to negotiate with like majority Islamic countries would have been impossible with Wilders at the helm. So they did not opt to do that. But one of the things they're going to do, and it's like insane, is I'm not sure, I cannot find the English word for it, but I think by describing it, you will understand, is that they will spend a few billion less on education, higher education, in like a year, from like January onwards to 2025. And that's like insane. Like I just cannot fathom. I literally don't understand those kinds of decisions. And then students that study, have not finished their bachelor, for example, in like 3 years and do like a year extra, 2 years, have to pay like 3,000 euros extra. Like I really don't get that. And to stay within the context of poverty, it's like it just makes the lives of students in the Netherlands were terrible for like the past couple of years, and now it's like even worse. And then the universities also have like a harder time. I'm not sure if something similar is going on in the States, but with Wilders right now, I don't know. I'm a Muslim. I'm not really that hard against Wilders, but like this just impacts me immediately, and also like my university teachers and so on. They're gonna actually protest next week. I'm probably gonna join that, but I really don't get that, and also probably makes the ability to kind of climb out of poverty, kind of to make a link to that much harder. It's just I really don't get that. I don't understand it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think there's I think that reminds me of and actually I was reminded actually when you were talking, Chris, too, of kind of the whole idea of social Darwinism that we don't seem to have kind of gotten past, where the point of it apparently is that it's not the best idea to help people up, because if reality is about survival of the fittest, which actually Herbert Spencer developed that term. That wasn't from Darwin himself. That was Spencer's term, survival of the fittest. That if you help the unfit, and by the unfit, that means anybody who lacks access to education, right, or who is in poverty, right, or who for whatever reason hasn't won the game. They haven't won sort of QED because they were less fit. And so raising them up is somehow going to derange the natural order in a way that this process is no longer going to be able to work. And
yeah, do you think that there are people, there probably are, this is like an assumption and like a question that kind of also already answers in a sense, but like I'm going to ask it. It's like, do you think that there are people that actually want people to stay poor? Like let's say in the context of the United States, that have more benefit from people staying poor for like various reasons, potentially?
I think possibly, but I think probably more. Pat says yes, of course. I think that more, even more than that, though. Maybe, yeah. And I'll agree with you, Pat. But even more than that, I think would like people to disappear, right? Because I think that I think this goes along with kind of this generalized idea that there are too many people on the planet anyway. So if the ones who are unsuccessful would just disappear, then things, then there would be more of the pie for the.
The funny thing is, I just read like a manga, and it's about this this whole thing. It's a really good manga. It's about like a group of friends that like in their younger years they have like a fantasy of how they are going to do world domination and whatever. And there's a random dude that actually executes it, and then the other friends have to kind of move against him because they're like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And so he tries to actually has this kind of plan of like kind of annihilating the whole world. Basically that kind of, I think they're like deep state kind of that kind of conspiracy shizzle. But it was a very interesting manga. And I don't. Do you kind of do you guys? I'm just curious, just general question. Do you kind of also believe in that there are actually people in the world that might want people, kind of really kind of eliminate people, large majority, too much people in the world? Like, I
Well,
don't know. That's kind of a general question, but
Tim would be better able to probably because he's so hooked into the green um, movement closer to Europe.
what is the green movement?
Well, the Greens in Europe, the Greens are environmentalists and
Yeah.
and ecologically slash people who are who want to support the environment and ecology, but also have a kind of an economic theory that relates to it. And I think that there's a radical wing, at least it has been said of this radical wing of the Greens, that there are some people who have, gone on record saying, the Earth would be in much better shape if there were only 2 billion people. And that may, and you can never really 100% tell, I don't think, whether that's exaggeration for effect. I think somebody said something about somebody else. I think Peter Thiel, who had said about Trump that he needs to be taken seriously but not literally. Years ago probably in the 2016 cycle, Peter Thiel had said that about Trump. And so I think that applies to these people, who are saying, wouldn't it be great if there were, if there were only 2 billion people on the planet? And I think that there has been and still is a lot of anxiety about 8-9 billion population amongst most of ecological and environmental scientists. There are other people who contest that claim as well. So yeah, I don't know. I can't figure out in my own mind whether how seriously to take that idea.
Does Tim believe that?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe interesting
That's
to
a good
ask him.
question. He's probably aware that
He's gonna start with us. He's
Yeah.
gonna start with eliminating us.
Right.
Joking.
Yes. Yeah, when the revolution comes, we'll be the first with our backs against the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris is right. In the chat, it's a very zero-sum sort of a proposition, and Malthusianism kind of always is, right? This idea that there's finite resources, or there is a linear path for expansion. That was really Malthus's idea, right? Was that agricultural productivity increases in a linear way, but population increases exponentially, and so ultimately, at some point, we're going to hit the wall. What's going on in there? Oh, a lot of
Yeah, a lot of chat.
What's going on here, Chris?
Oh no, it's just that idea of either building people up or tearing them down, or the competition. And I always think of that Thomas Jefferson quote of, you can take my candle that's lit and light your own candle, and you having a light doesn't diminish the light that I'm carrying around with me. Yeah. In some sense. Yeah. Which is
right.
Kind of an interesting metaphor.
Not at all a zero-sum game. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of funny because I've always, and one of the things I actually said out loud to my students this week was I've always been on the side of kind of the little guy, right? I've always, in early American history, I was on the side of Shays' rebels, right, in Western Massachusetts, right, who were closing the courthouses so that their buddies' farms couldn't be foreclosed on by the bad guys from Boston who came, to Western Mass to foreclose on farms and stuff, following the direction of people like, John Adams, who thought that, that Thomas Paine's writing was too damn democratical. And so all, so that's always been sort of where my sympathies have lain. And so this election is exactly what John Adams was talking about. Right? This was the people, the regular people, the populists. This was the populist uprising, right? This was the people who, in Adams's imagination, did not understand the full extent of the issues, felt pain but didn't think it through or whatever, and were manipulated by a demagogue, they would say, or Adams would have said. And so I've sort of been confronted with this question for myself: is do I then have to reevaluate my approach to atoms, because I've always sort of been down on atoms. I sort of despised them a little bit as as an elitist. Or the technocrats of the progressive era, which was very elite driven and top down, and just stand back and let the experts take care of this sort of thing.
Well,
And the social relation between those two groups. Maybe I have to rethink this. Sorry,
there's generally been a movement since the early 2000s with it, and it started with the internet and then social media and all these technologists who wear rose-colored glasses. And so you have people like Mark Zuckerberg in particular. Yeah, Facebook is going to open up the world and democratize things, and it's only going to be all good.
Right.
And it took less than a decade, roughly, to figure out there are some heavy social harms and bads that this technology has. And generally, we wear blinders to them. So, that kind of idea of Jefferson and atoms in that kind of early technology, the democracy they're playing with could be looked at as a piece of technology that, yes, may have a lot of good, but how you apply it and what happens can also create traumatic harms. And the case in point for them is, yeah, we'll let the Electoral College and slavery slip through the cracks, and instead of facing it now, we'll brush it under the rug. And that application of that technology at that time has led to massive problems later on that would have been way easier and cheaper to have dealt with at that time. Now, it may have changed the arc of how history played out, although honestly, I think given the growth in the space and other things that happened thereafter, the U.S. would roughly still be in the same position now, even had they dealt with that stuff.
Interesting to think of it as technologies. That might be a really interesting way to kind of approach this. Because I had been, and it's kind of funny because I had been presenting the election in the frame of technological change, right? Going from sort of print journalism and the yellow journalism of 1898 that led to the Spanish-American War, to then this period after the Second World War when we had the three networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and this business model that drove consensus and kind of a construction of shared reality that people nowadays are very nostalgic for. Remember when everybody agreed, at least on the kind of the ground truths, and when Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America. And then I drew this all on the board this week for the students, and I said, we have these three things, and I drew a target, and so everybody is seeking, the center, right, and seeking the biggest Nielsen share that they could get by targeting that center, and then boom, cable. And actually students, young people nowadays don't even know what cable is. They don't remember cable. And so I had to tell them, then there was this thing, right? They had these big, dishes, and they sucked in all the signals, and they ran them through routers. And I had the personal experience of having sold the Cisco routers to the AT&T head end here in Roseville, and so I used to get to go in there to the server rooms and stuff, and then it went out on these coax cables, and then said, do you remember cable channels? And they did remember some cable channels, so I was able to kind of tell, to demonstrate, the focus on niches and all of that.
There was a quirky shift this week with election coverage, because we cut the cable ages ago and have kind of moved more towards streaming.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, where are we going to watch? What election coverage do we want to watch tonight?
Yeah.
And, my wife's like, let's do CNN. And I'm like, well, but we don't get CNN because it's cable. Yeah. And you've got to pay or have a subscription to that specifically to get it.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly, and I think it's the first time they've done it, we do have HBO Max, or what's now called Max, which is a streaming service. And because they're a corporate-owned parent, they literally created a CNN stream on Max for the election coverage.
Wow.
So for a minute, you got CNN for the election day. And I'm kind of curious to see what that experiment for them looks like, and do they then bundle that into the rest of their streaming options, or do they make more money by keeping it separate?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that'll be interesting to see, because that was, the grabbing of eyeballs, became such a huge thing. And that'll be interesting to see kind of how this goes forward, right? What will news media do? Are they going to try to rerun, the 2016 to 2020 era of, just, keeping ridiculous, crazy.
Yeah, I've got the other. I have a call similar to this on Wednesdays. That is a bunch of technologists who get together, and it's usually anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 of us, and it's an interestingly diverse group. But one of the members is a senior technologist for the Washington Post. So it's been interesting to see and hear his take on internal politics for things going on with respect to the idea of, democracy dies in darkness versus being owned by a multi-billionaire who this past week, kind of kowtowed to, we're not going to make an endorsement.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what they say about that.
I haven't checked in a few days, but the last time I looked at numbers, because of that, we're not making an endorsement nod, they lost 250,000 subscribers, which is just, a huge number for any newspaper.
Yeah. If it has to, now, did it lose? I heard a rumor that it lost a lot of people too, that a lot of the people who wanted to, to go on the record and make it.
I think a handful stepped off the editorial board.
Yeah, I don't think anybody
left their jobs
quit, but they just stepped off a responsibility that was tangential to their. It was like a perk of being there. Like, okay, here's the elite who write for us, and then here's the elite of the elite who write for the editorial board.
So they made a symbolic protest.
Yeah. What I'll be interested in is, yes, they lost 10% of their subscribers in a fortnight, but what happens over the next year as those readers who went to the Post in response to the previous Trump presidency, what do they do next? Right? Do they try to find alternative media sources? Just, cards on the table. We did not cancel our subscription because, despite a disagreement with perhaps that decision by Bezos, I don't think it mattered much, and it was clearly not Machiavellian, but it was clearly, his protection of his other resources that led to it.
Yeah. It's interesting that darkness is good.
And he's on the street again, right?
Is he? God.
Yeah, I think he was on. Yeah. I think he got up back on the street on like the 4th or something.
Wow.
Well, maybe he needs to move to Antarctica where it's dark 6 months of the year.
Yeah.
Someplace like that.
Or Scandinavia, perhaps.
Right. And then have a winter home in Iceland or something. Yeah.
No, parts of Scandinavia already have too much issue with neo-Nazis. They don't need Steve Bannon.
Right. Can you do southern Argentina, perhaps?
Yeah. I don't feel right at all.
No. There's too many people immigrated from Wales to Argentina. You don't want to inflict that on them either.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of Italians in Argentina too. They apparently more. I was really surprised to find out that more Southern Italians went to Argentina than went through Ellis Island. So so more things about the world that we can discover. But
so I want to ask a question about the
streets of New York, wherever he is.
I'm sorry, what was that, Florian?
Oh, nothing. Obviously, we're not going to deport Bannon. That's not in the plan.
No.
But I wonder, since so many immigrants are working in these low-wage jobs that the book talks about, what's going to happen if there is this mass deportation? Just wonder about that, because now you have figures for 2020 before Trump implements these draconian policies, if you believe him.
I
The
imagine.
blob doesn't stop him.
Well, I imagine that will run up against the reality of the of people who have Trump's ear, needing workers like this, people to to work, to wash their hotel, toilets,
Right.
and
Shine their shoes and so on.
shoes, and and be bus tables at their restaurants and all that. Yeah, I think that a lot of that that rhetorical stuff, and again, I'm hoping that Peter Thiel was right, that he should be taken seriously but not literally, and that a lot of this stuff is campaign exaggeration, and and the type of lying that all politicians do, and then kind of slowly walk back from. But yeah, Mohammed, you wanted to throw something in, didn't you?
Yeah, so I was curious about how I had to send something, but like I was curious about how technology. So we were talking about technology and poverty and how they might interact, and how that also, I suppose, part like kind of interacts with elections and so on. So I was kind of curious if that was if you all think that technology, particularly like social media and other technologies, and also maybe like technologies like PKM, which are very marginal. Nobody knows about them, but like they're interesting in a sense, and all of that stuff. If that can kind of help people in poverty or not, because they have access to like, I suppose a person in poverty still has a decent iPhone, and it's not really that different from a person that is rich. So in that sense, it's kind of there's not much difference there, right?
Well,
Of course.
But
Yeah.
There's been a lot of commoditization of technology that brings the price way down. So, as a simple, common example, the fact that most of America has a camera with streaming capability in their pocket, it literally has made a huge societal turn, or at least acknowledgement of the fact that, yes, there is police brutality, and it happens way more regularly than America was willing to admit before, in much the same way that the Sears Roebuck catalog out of Chicago made it such that the countryside poor who were marginalized, particularly African Americans, who had to take their money to the local town store to buy whatever the thing was, and the shopkeeper may or may not decide to sell to them because, oh no, you're poor, you don't need that. Why are you wasting all of your money on fingernail polish, as an example? But suddenly the Sears Roebuck catalog shows up, and they can mail order that thing that they need without having to worry about the emotional and cultural tax on them going into a store to buy whatever it is they want, or being watched or followed or any of those things.
And I think that's all true, but I think, and I suspect Desmond will cover some of this, is that those investments require the investments of education, the investments of PKM, et cetera. While we have enabling technologies that reduce the cost, still require temporal cost. It requires time and emotional focus and the rest, which poverty reduces, as we've sort of touched on a little bit in this discussion.
Well, and to whatever extent the information, I mean, I think the biggest thing since the beginning of the internet has always been access to information, access to to things that that people might not prefer you to see and hear and know about. And so, but I think that that to what you're saying, Eric, I think that you have to have time, and you have to be able to filter, which is a huge investment, and you have to but even so, even having said all that, having said that that it isn't going to be easy, I think it will at least be possible until and unless the pipe is actually closed down or is controlled, or what goes through the pipe is controlled,
or the pipe is flooded with crap, as
that's
Heather Bannon would say, or as AI skeptics would propose.
That's actually the probably the low cost way of implementing censorship is just flood the space with crap.
Yeah, which is the Chinese method.
Yeah. And so that's something that people, but then maybe there is an opportunity for AI to help with that as well. Once AI can be, if people can actually run AI on local devices. Academics tend to poo-poo Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia. I use Wikipedia all the time.
What is your level of engagement with? Do you still, when you approach Wikipedia, do you still think trust but verify?
Yeah. I mean, I don't trust Wikipedia for I mean, I'm normally going to find out. Yeah, I do say that about all sources, but I don't go to Wikipedia to find out something very controversial and then immediately believe it. But oftentimes I'm going to find out, okay, what years was John Jay Chief Justice on the Supreme Court? I mean, I don't think Wikipedia is going to be wrong about that. If it gives me something wildly, if it says he was Chief Justice for 50 years, then I'll that. I mean, it's easy. It's oftentimes easier than we want to admit to see inconsistencies and to get that little tickling, clue that maybe this isn't correct.
Yeah. And to Eric's point, I think that's very true about I suppose. Also about that information flooding and a lot of bullcrap flooding. Yeah, that's very true. But also, I suppose that people are just, instead of using the technology, they are being abused by big companies that are capturing their attention, and they're numb and unconscious to it.
Mhm.
And it's like it can enable them, but it probably has disabled them to the point that they do not see that it can be an enabling technology, I suppose. Yeah. So
Well, I think it's a question also of kind of scope and scale, right, as well, because I've been involved in Wikipedia, page editing arguments and I've added things to pages that other people have not. I actually, in one or two cases, have edited out, and then I had to go put it back. But generally, it is possible in the background pages to have a rational conversation when it's about data or interpretation of things that are not really super politically consequential. And so I think that there's an idea that people have now, Mohammed, that Wikipedia has been irretrievably poisoned, and and that nobody can believe anything. And I don't think that and I think that to some extent maybe that's an attempt to sort of invalidate the model of kind of shared knowledge creation and peer interaction. In a thing like that will be ultimately free to the world to go to and search for the data and the information and the things that they're looking for. I think that there's, I mean, I still contribute to Wikipedia every time they hit me up, I think, because I think it's what's the alternative? Some type of ivory tower, very agenda driven thing. Again, it's that idea that, oh, remember back in the good old days when Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America. Well, we were still being fed a line of bullshit. It was just that everybody agreed on it, and it was the same one, right? There was still manufactured consent, right? And that's actually the era in which Chomsky came up with that whole idea, although he didn't invent the term. But the idea that this thing that everybody agreed to as a ground truth was kind of suspect. I think that's the thing that we go back to if we don't have these kind of messier, more contested things to fight over.
yeah, so to kind of circle back, the Wikipedia thing, in my experience, I just use it for reference to just kind of refresh the memory, and that's it. Like, why would that be bad? I think my university teachers generally say like don't reference Wikipedia, which I think no one no one does in their paper.
Mhm.
But generally when you write a paper, it's like also I think in most people, in my case, it's like at least that's how it's been told to me. It's like you don't have to reference everything. Some things are self-explanatory, and there's the context, of course, of that the teacher knows, right? So it depends on the audience, but you really don't have to kind of cite basic stats, age, name, like where he came from, or uh, you don't really have to cite that. So you don't even have to kind of use a reference. So if you got that information from Wikipedia, it's like, why would you want to cite that? I also want to say something else, which kind of circled back to the enable disabling technologies, but maybe someone, I don't know. That's kind of my impression of Wikipedia and my experience with it. So I think I think it's a good way of collaborating online, and kind of creating knowledge. I think it's only good. I think Chris had on the Zettelkasten.de like a discussion about, I think it was about Wikipedia or it was about Eminem's Zettelkasten. And he said that it was a Zettelkasten. A lot of people, I don't know who was kind of disagreeing with him and said that it wasn't. But I thought it was hilarious. But I think it's a kind of a nice example of a collaborative Zettelkasten, perhaps. So yeah.
Well, it's that the friction of yes, it is, no, it isn't. And then, but then that forces you to look at prior definitions of what that thing was. And it takes almost no effort to go back to the 2013 Marbach exhibition in Germany that showed there were 6 Zettelkasten that the museum had and put in that exhibition. And of the 6, by far, Luhmann's version and how he organized it was dramatically different than the other 5. But it's very obvious that the other 5 are all much closer to what Eminem was doing. Now, and Eminem, I will grant you, is to the either far right or far left, depending on which direction you want to put Luhmann at one end and Eminem at the other. They are polar opposites in terms of how they organized and managed, but they are both very definitely slips and boxes, but everybody wants to think, oh, Luhmann invented this idea out of whole cloth just by himself. Like, oh, how genius was he?
Oh, you have successfully proven to the world that is not the case, Chris.
And I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's 3 people who are going to stumble across this. And, I even in my notes, I think I have a tag. I haven't used it in a while, but I, for a long time, used the, Zettelkasten origin myth was a tag.
Yeah.
And almost every time it was used, it was somewhere either online on the internet, in the blogosphere, or in these weird PKM spaces,
Funnily enough, I've seen that tag and I've also used it because I thought it was a very good way to tag. So I've kind of also started using that tag. So it's kind of funny. But I think there's also the kind of claim of like that Luhmann kind of, or that I suppose that the version of Luhmann, like maybe they can acknowledge that because they cannot kind of ignore fact, right? There's like a whole history and everything about that, but they cannot ignore that fact. But they might claim, I suppose, some people that Luhmann's Zettelkasten is the way, and there's like some kind of intellectual superiority complex going on, I suppose. So to say that, Eminem's Zettelkasten is not a Zettelkasten, I mean, like, what is that? And my method kind of induces better thinking, or like, I don't know. Yeah.
So then also there's sort of a question of of process that's not, I mean, there are some assumptions made about Luhmann's process, right? Because of the numbering and because of all, because of the way that he talked about it in the kind of brief moments that he did talk about it, that you would assume is much different in, Eminem's bunch of, slips from, cocktail napkins or scraps of paper or, matchbook covers or whatever it is that he scribbled his little things down on. And, but actually those might open up some interesting areas of, to what extent, if we imagine that Eminem is thinking of his thing, he goes into the box, he looks at things, they jog his memory, they give him ideas, they get the kind of creative juices flowing. We imagine that Luhmann's process is much different, but what if part of it is similar? Part of it is about jogging memory and kind of getting getting his, and some type of a retrieval practice, right? Or, kind of a memory, castle practice where, the thing that he wrote down then boom, explodes a whole new set of connections in his brain that, that may or may not really be represented. There may be an analogous, set of linked slips in his box, but but part of this, the thing that fascinates me is that part of this is a mental process as well as an actual physical or logical structure. And
there's an essay I haven't written yet, and my intention essentially one day or another is to put it into a book. But the thing no one talks about is not just what did the systems look like before Luhmann changed his, but what were the reasons behind why he may have changed it and took the tack that he did take. So, I'll give him a tiny bit of credit for having the conversation, but Scott Shepard chatted with Luhmann's son and gave us the ability to point to Haida's book, which essentially is how do you keep a commonplace book on index cards? Mm-hmm. And it goes back and shows you take notes, you put them on index cards, and then you can rearrange them and make sense of a thing and then write your book. And so Haida writes in German essentially what everybody else prior to him was writing. Here's the method I use. Mm-hmm. But when you're a day-to-day academic doing research and writing, particularly in the humanities, you would, prior to this, you would have, and I'll demonstrate it with visuals because I happen to have them so we can look at what that practice was. Cool. So you would have these, tabbed cards mm-hmm. with categories written on them for whatever the topic is. So, if you're a historian, you'll have a whole drawer of history, but the particular subtopics in history will each have their own headed card. Mm-hmm. And then you'll dump stuff in there. So now the question is, if I'm writing about something in the 18th century that can have multiple tags, how do I file that? Mm-hmm. And up until roughly the time that Luhmann is working, you probably employ a secretary, and you may write out a card and write 3 tags at the bottom. Then you hand it to your secretary, and in prior centuries, they've used the word amanuensis, with manual being the root word there. Mm-hmm. You would hand it over, and they would type up your cards, and they would take the card you gave them, make 3 or 4 copies for each of the tags, and then they would file it in all those places, which is a lot of extra manual work. And Luhmann, working on shoestring budget as an outsider who is not an academic.
Right, 20 years budget.
Does he have that budget? Yeah. Does he have a secretary he can rely on? Generally, he doesn't. And so he decides it's much easier to have a sparser index and I don't want to copy out 4 copies of all my things or 6 or however many there may be, and then have to do that extra work of filing. So what I'll do is I'll just number them so they have an address and I can find them. And he worked in German public administration, and there were methods of numbering things in file folders that go back to the early library card catalogs. So he had experience with how do I decide where to file this one place, one time, and still be able to find it. And even in, Kaiser in 1911, and I think maybe 1908, has 2 books about, and at that time in English it was called The Card System. Mm-hmm. You can find those things, and it was how do you index it, and in your index point to where the thing is. But because he's numbering them and he's got this number system, he doesn't have to make 4 copies or 3 or 2 or 10 mm-hmm. for where he files it. And then the question then becomes, how much work do you want to put into your system, and where are you going to see the gains come back? So for Eminem, throwing the stuff into a box, he's going to get just as much value out of that creatively without putting all the extra work in putting down a number, filing it in a particular spot, and knowing he can get it back out again.
Mhm.
So Sasha has an article about where does coherence reside in the Zettelkasten. And what I see a lot of people doing is they're adopting a Luhmann Artig, and Artig being the German version of ESC. So I hate using Luhmann-esque, just seems like an affront to Luhmann. So a Luhmann Artig method of filing, because he knows exactly what he's going to use his notes for and that he will use them off in the future, he's putting a lot more work into them on the front end to organize and file and put them away, because he knows he's going to, whether I do it now or do it later, I'm going to have to do that work. And so he saves himself the time to put the work in up front rather than putting it in later. And so, but most people are not using their slip box for the same purposes that Luhmann was. So they're putting a huge amount of work in up front that they're never going to realize the gains for later on. And for them, I say, use a more commonplace book practice, because it's easier to collect. You can still find the stuff. But if you're not writing and using the thing later and relying on it as heavily as Luhmann did, why are you putting all that work in on the front end for something you're never going to see the gains for on the back end? And
can I add something?
It's one of those things none of us talk about this.
Well, I think
because
also,
no one realizes it.
I think also sociology kind of lent itself at that moment to that technique, right? Because this cross-referencing, this fragmentation of ideas, and and going someplace else and grabbing something, and we've criticized this throughout over the years here of people dumping out their Zettelkastens and just throwing everything in, and I think that that there was a little bit of a premium, there was a little bit of a kind of a cachet to that in the type of work, the type of writing that Luhmann was doing. So that was an advantage for him that might not be to somebody else. I do think that the commonplace book idea actually also kind of fascinates me, because it sort of blends that sort of short form, long form thing that I think is has been kind of a sub theme of a lot of the talk that we've had, and a lot of thinking that I've been doing about how best to sort of generate ideas and then deal with them and process them and make them valuable in terms of output. But I do think that yeah, I mean, Chris, what I take away from what you said is that, again, it's the goal. It's why are you doing this? And and certainly Eminem doesn't need to cite his source. And he doesn't need to, what he needs to do is use them creatively and jam them together and bump them up against each other in interesting ways. And, and all of that you can do in a, in a much more kind of casual, informal box of slips. To go back, Florian's going back to dragging us back to the text. So we just return to the text momentarily before we're done. Matthew doesn't temporize his accounts of poverty. I think that's an element of, if I understand you, Florian, of relying too much on statistics too, right? That it's not kind of human and visceral enough. I did
Partly,
think. Go ahead.
Yeah, partly, but also he's straightforward. I was just reading a book on poetry, advanced poetry, and there's there's an anthology, begins with an anthology. It says you ought to start your Ars Poetica before even reading the text. All right, so I wrote a satire of this institutional approach, and there's a poem about the among people, a genocide. And so they say the story of this, of people exiled and, the genocide is, quote, almost unbearable. So I consider that institutional temporizing.
Mm.
And I haven't seen that in the book yet. I haven't seen it. It's not temporized. So perhaps I'm seizing on a single phrase, but anyway.
No,
Um,
yeah.
no, I mean, there's a tendency among academics, and I'm one. I'm one of them. Actually, I think I mentioned I have a checkered career. I'm now a pea-brained administrator, and I'm hoping to retire soon. And you will pardon the redundancy. A pea-brained administrator in the same. Yes. So, um, I just, I don't know, what can I say? I'll just leave it at that. I thought the book was at least refreshing by not leaving out the account of people's fingers getting and hands getting chopped off by bandsaws.
Yes.
That's what you want to see. You want to see the actual visceral, ugly reality of this. That it's illegal to be a criminal and illegal to be poor in America. That's what it amounts to.
I agree.
So
I think I agree with you completely. I think that the visceral nature of this, and actually another meat packing example was years ago. I think about 10 years or a dozen years ago, there were a series of videos made by undercover people who went into packing houses and then published videos of the work that they were doing, the scene, what it was actually like to be in, to be a meat packer in the 21st century on YouTube, and people were appalled. I think that needs to be, that not only do those kind of shocking things need to appear on places like YouTube, but then somebody, who can contextualize them, like Desmond needs to, kind of say, yeah, this is the experience, and then connect that with the data and the statistics. And this is how many people, and this is 2 amputations per week, and that sort of thing. I think, kind of connects it to.
It's a shocking statistic.
It is.
Well, that's some of the value I see even in this first chapter is there's all these big statistics, but I'm going to tie it down with my personal experience to show you the individual. Because too often, if you say, "Oh, it's generic, it's happening everywhere," then that's just part of the system. Who cares?
Yeah.
But when you can see the individual person and see them as a person, and this is what. It's not what they're doing, but it's what's being done to them that really shocks the senses.
Right. Well, that's the comma by America part, right?
Yeah. Or even, an example of people videotaping things. There was the group of 2 or 3 people who were sitting down with executives from Planned Parenthood and surreptitiously recording those meetings to see if they could get them to say crazy, insane things on tape.
Oh,
which generally they didn't, particularly if you see the whole video in toto versus the short snippets that they edited down to try and tell a story that didn't exist
right
through editing. But that being said, I've got to go in a second, but how far are we going to read through for next week?
Why don't we read 3 chapters for next week? Why don't we read 2, 3, 4, which will take us to about page 79, I think, in the print version. And then the following week, 5, 6, 7, then we break for Thanksgiving, and then the first week of December, 8, 9, and epilogue. And then by mid-December, we can either take a break or move on to a new book.
And are we going to take Thanksgiving off, or are we going to do a Saturday morning respite from the family?
I think we should. I think I will be traveling, so I think it would be, be better. Let me just look at my calendar. I will be in California. I could do a morning thing, so I'll leave that up to everybody else. I would be willing to do it. It would be fun to do. But
which California city are you visiting?
I will be in Woodland, which is out between Davis and Sacramento.
Okay. I was going to say if you're down here, because I know there's some Irvine family, but meet you for coffee in person.
I would love to do that sometime. Maybe when I come to the Huntington.
Oh, if you come to the Huntington, and you need to save a couple bucks, we have an extra room. I think we could put you up.
Oh, cool.
And I'm literally 2 miles away.
Oh, wow.
It's it's close.
That's great. Well, I have, now that my life has changed quite a bit, I'm thinking much more seriously about actually doing research trips and stuff. So yeah, I'm kind of excited about all the opportunities that the whole new world that we're living in affords me. So yeah,
Or if you need hotel recommendations, I think I've stated.
I'll just stay
at
with
some
you,
point
Chris.
most things.
That'd be great.
Well, I mean, you may like to hang out at the Langham, you know, and they've got a much nicer pool than I do.
Oh, all right. We'll talk about it. All right. Well, thanks everybody. This was a lot of fun. I will post the chat almost immediately, and then I'll try to get the video up in the next 24 hours. So see you soon.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah, bye.
This week.